Glossy produces, above all, Art Zone.
Grave diggers.
Hi everyone,
Hey folks,
it's Erin from Korea,
and it's Amr in nighttime Toronto.
and welcome to another episode of Das Criminal Podcast.
And this one is hilarious. For me at least, it was hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, you already saw the title, so you know what we're going to be talking about today.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no surprises.
Yeah, it's funny that, both of us know about this, are in depth, because it shows how online we've been for so long that this was a thing.
True. Yeah, before we jump into it, we just have a couple quick things.
Yeah, so if you haven't seen it already, the final episode of Radio Warner that I have done with John and Mark is up now. This the series finale, if you will. They're wonderful people over there, so check them out. Check out the series I did with them.
Yeah, and if you're joining us because you heard Amr on Radio Warner, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for coming, guys.
I finally have actual Wi-Fi, which is extremely exciting, but I also have strep throat. So sorry for the late recording and uploading. It's painful to speak. I don't know if you can hear, I would call the tightness in my voice. I just took another pill, another anti-inflammatory.
Yeah, we try to get the episodes done for you guys on a consistent basis. But, sometimes these things happen, so bear with us.
Yeah, we usually record Mondays for me, Sunday nights for Amr. But Monday, yesterday, I had to go to the doctor, obviously. I couldn't even talk. So this is an improvement, actually.
Yeah, I hope you guys don't mind. We're doing our best to serve our cult. So without further ado, you want to get into it?
Yeah, maybe if you hate vocal fry, avoid this one. Okay, also a quick content warning. Again, if you clicked on this, you know what we're talking about, I assume, but there are war crimes, particularly against children, which we refer to in this episode, if that's really going to upset you. Maybe this isn't the best one for you. If you had internet access in 2012, you likely remember a film and social media campaign dubbed Kony 2012, a drive to apprehend Ugandan militia leader and war criminal Joseph Kony. The 30-minute viral video created and posted by an organization called Invisible Children Incorporated urged viewers to spread awareness of Kony, with the mission of apprehending him by the end of that year.
Yeah, the internet in 2012 was such a wildly different place from what it is too, as a sort of reflection of society. Because I remember being online, even back then, like capital O online, and that was back in the sort of, I guess, the peak of the Obama era. So the internet was sort of filled with the beginning of crude memes, cat pictures, and sort of viral videos like this trying to hitch on a particular cause. In a weird way, this was like before the full-on irony era that we live in right now.
As the saying goes, the higher you climb, the further you fall. And the Kony 2012 campaign plummeted. The film's narrator, Jason Russell, suffered a mental breakdown soon after the piece's unexpected success. An Invisible Children's call for a worldwide canvassing campaign on the night of April 20th received little engagement. In this episode, we have two stories unfolding at the same time. The first is the calamity of the Kony 2012 campaign, its fervid rise, rapid fall, and immortalization as an internet meme. But a second theory lurks beneath Invisible Children's glossy PR campaign, one which includes the commodification of activism, laundering United States imperialism in Central Africa, and mining trauma for profit. Let's start with the Kony 2012 video. If you're not as perpetually online as Amr and I, don't worry, we're about to summarize the video. But if you do remember the 2012 video, enjoy this blast from the past. The video is simply titled Kony 2012 in all caps, and it's a slick 30-minute production. At the time of recording, it has 102 million views on YouTube. The opening text reads, quote, "Nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come, whose time is now," end quote. So it begins by noting the rise of social media, particularly Facebook and YouTube, and how human beings have a desire to connect. After this introduction, they say, quote, "The next 27 minutes are an experiment, but in order for it to work, you have to pay attention," end quote. Now, Jess and Joe of the Cutting Class podcast already pointed this out, but the video employs some evangelical proselytizing strategies, making viewers feel like we're included in something and we have a task or a mission to pursue. Keep this in mind because it comes up again during our discussion.
Yeah, I think this is the same reason QAnon is popular, because it allows people to be a part of something without having actually to do anything, like anything particularly difficult or time-consuming. And in both cases, people are encouraged to participate such that they become protagonists in this adventure, this little adventure game, without actually, actually doing anything. So it's very counterintuitive because on the one hand, you feel like you're doing something, but you're not really, just sharing content and posting. So it gives you this feeling of productive satisfaction that is very impotent.
The video then cuts to some footage of the narrator, Jason Russell's young son, Gavin. Gavin, a blonde-haired American boy, foils another child introduced shortly after, Jacob from Uganda. The footage then jumps to Russell meeting Jacob several years before in northern Uganda. Jacob describes living in fear of the rebels, who might arrest and kill him. Jacob says the rebels caught and killed his brother using a panga, basically a machete. He witnessed this happen. Ugandan children describe coming into town to sleep, because those who live on the outskirts are at risk of rebel kidnappings. There is footage then of sleeping African children, literally set to sad violin music. There's a quote that really struck me referring to the children gathering in town to sleep. It's, quote, "If that happened one night in America, it would be on the cover of Newsweek," end quote. So that's what the narrator, Jason Russell, tells someone in the film.
I just find it strange how focused everyone is. Like, is it just me, or there's a lot of obsession with like saving children in Africa in particular? Really weird.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting, he says it would be on the cover of Newsweek. This is during a previous trip to Uganda. It's not in 2012. So his mind is on publicity.
Yeah, he's seeking fame, really.
Right. This is indicating years before he's like, what are people talking about? What gets attention? I'd like to point out there are children, particularly poor children, Black and Indigenous children, and definitely migrant children, suffering in the United States right now. And it rarely makes the cover of Newsweek magazine.
Yeah, I mean, I just skimmed the internet, and there are currently, as of 2019, 567,715 homeless people in the US. And of those, 35,038 of them are unaccompanied youth. So where the hell are those sad videos with sad violin for those people?
Jacob expresses hopelessness on camera, saying that he would rather die than remain on an earth without opportunities for him. He becomes emotional while discussing how he misses his brother. Now, I read this scene as exploitative of Jacob's trauma, but as far as I've been able to find, Jacob, who is now an adult, hasn't indicated that he feels exploited by the film, and I don't want to speak for him.
Yeah, I mean, is it just me? But like, I don't know. It does feel like trauma porn. Like, again, we don't want to speak for the guy, but it does feel like trauma porn.
Oh, definitely. It's manipulative. Jason Russell promises Jacob that he'll do everything he can to stop them, the unnamed rebels at this point in the film. Now he says, quote, "That promise is not just about Jacob or me. It's about you," end quote. Again, evangelical missionary talking points.
Yeah, it's like, hey, look, you can do something, and that something is pressing a button, which is the exact same thing, the exact same satisfaction you feel in video games.
Right, he's trying to make the viewers feel as though we have a stake in whatever he's selling, this is about you. You have to care. You have to do something. Like, honestly, I don't have that much of a connection to Uganda. I'm sure there are maybe parts in my cell phone or something that were mined in Uganda. That's definitely possible. But personally, the conflict in northern Uganda is not about me. It's not fucking about Aaron in Seoul, Korea.
Yeah, I mean, it's just weird how there's this. Why do you have to do something? Why does everyone have to do something all the time? Like, sometimes doing nothing is doing something. Just don't interfere in other people's affairs. Like, let the sovereign nation of Uganda deal with its rebel problem in a way any sovereign country should and could.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about this more in our discussion point. So then Russell says, quote, "If we succeed, we change the course of human history," end quote. Really? Let's take the example of Osama bin Laden, a much better known bad guy. Did taking him out really change the course of human history, or did it just make us feel good for a little bit, like we had our revenge for 9/11, while Al-Qaeda continues to terrorize people in places like Syria and Yemen?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of the video game analogy, I think there's also a problem with people generally sort of individualizing systemic problems. And in this case, much like bin Laden, people reduce the very complicated and messy problems into a single individual that you can visualize and then, by extension, you can defeat. And I can see why it's very appealing, because it's much easier to think that beating this big bad boss in the final level of a video game will solve all the problems than, analyzing things like imperialism, colonialism, geopolitics, ethnic nationalism, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, Russell uses this inclusive but extreme language throughout the video. Things like, "we're running out of time." Who is we? Literally every person on the planet? I think that's what he's trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird how this guy. You're right. Like, I don't mean to be callous, but like, Amar, and Toronto have very little to do with the conflict in Uganda. Like, I can read about it and I can make myself informed about it, but it's very difficult for a lot of people to accept that there's just nothing you can personally do. Just let other people deal with their problems without, sometimes there's just such a thing as too many hands in the kitchen.
At 8 minutes and 43 seconds into the video, Russell finally mentions the LRA, Lord's Resistance Army. Though Russell just gives the abbreviation. He never says Lord's Resistance Army, just LRA. And its leader, Joseph Kony. So by this point, the viewer is invested in Jacob's trauma and what we will do to help him. Jason Russell then begins explaining the situation to his son, Gavin. He tells Gavin, in kid language, that Joseph Kony has an army of child soldiers. Again, critics of the film have suggested that Russell exploits his son to sell his message, but I don't think that's nearly the most concerning part of this debacle.
Okay, first of all, I find it hilarious that he's telling his kid this, just because I'd like to think in the Russell household, if Gavin isn't like eating his vegetables or brushing his teeth, then you know how in most households it's like, the Grinch will take you or whatever, like a sort of child's level way of trying to get them to do something.
Yeah, for us it was Father Baker.
Oh, what the hell is Father Baker? Is that a real person?
Yes! So Father Baker was this person who ran a Catholic orphanage for children, and our parents would threaten that we would be taken away to this Catholic orphanage by Father Baker, who in retrospect was probably a really good person, but we were taught to believe was really scary. And now, with the whole sex pest scandal of the Catholic Church...
Wow.
So if you're listening, Mom and Dad, thanks for that.
Wow, there's a certain dark level to that. Yeah. Okay, I mean, at least you guys had like a real person, like a real life person. In our house, it was the Wawi, which is like the Arabic version of a ghost or like a demon. So like ours was a lot more fictional, but a lot more menacing. So yeah, we had that. But I guess in the Russell household, it's Joseph Kony's gonna come and kidnap you and make you a child soldier.
I think it's much less weird that he's talking to his own kid than to Jacob from Uganda.
Yeah, I mean, they're both different levels of weird, but yeah, you're right. I also think it's insulting because, like, he's talking to his kid, and I guess his kid is also, like, supposed to be a stand-in for the audience, which is basically like he's telling us, you guys are as dumb as my kid.
Yeah, as we'll go on to see, he gives almost no context. So, Russell narrates to the viewer, apart from Gavin, that Joseph Kony abducts children and forces them into sex slavery or conscription. Over 30,000 children were violently forced to do horrible things, like killing their own parents at the behest of Joseph Kony. Jacob in Uganda was one of Kony's victims. Then Jason Russell says, quote, "As if Kony's crimes aren't bad enough, he is not fighting for any cause, but only to maintain power. He is not supported by anyone, and he has repeatedly used peace talks to rearm and murder again and again." End quote. This is just not true. Russell deliberately decontextualizes Joseph Kony and the LRA from Central African politics and paints Kony as a madman who just wants to watch the world burn.
Yeah, this bit really pissed me off because very few people, if any, just do things to watch the world burn. It's just so dumb. I mean, people generally have a material reason for their actions. They don't just wake up in the morning and take a big sip of coffee and say, today I'm going to be a bad guy. Most people have particular goals that they're, striving towards.
Right, and this isn't to say Kony isn't bad. He's bad. But there is more to it than just him waking up and being like, I think I'm going to kidnap 30,000 kids.
Yeah, he's not a cartoon villain.
The film shows a list of the International Criminal Court's wanted list of war criminals, all of whom happen to be African, but never queries why that might be. Joseph Kony tops the list, but familiar names like George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Tony Blair, Henry Kissinger, and Benjamin Netanyahu don't make the list, even though they also have the blood of innocent children on their hands. This isn't to say, again, that Joseph Kony isn't a bad guy. He certainly is. But we want to get the wheels in our brains turning as we consider why Western viewers get so riled up about an African warlord when Henry Kissinger is right there.
Yeah, the 800-year-old Henry Kissinger.
He's not even hiding in the jungle. You don't even have to find him. So Jason Russell says that he and his friends attempted to convince the United States to do something about Joseph Kony, but, quote, "Everyone in Washington we talked to said there is no way the United States will ever get involved in a conflict where our national security or financial interests aren't at stake." End quote. What? The United States loves involving itself in other people's conflicts, and while I agree that many of these are really for financial interests, it has used the humanitarian war justification before in strikes like bombing the Balkans. Again, I don't think this was motivated by peace and love, of course not. But it's not like the United States hasn't long painted itself as the world's police force.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hilarious that they're so blunt about it. I mean, you're right. I think, the US hasn't seen a war it doesn't love. And from a US perspective, all wars anywhere in the world, like you can throw a dart at a map, and if there's a conflict somewhere, then it by definition involves the US's financial interests, if not security interests. Because at the very least, you could sell weapons to people and make money. And it's just funny because in this case, they're like, yeah, this doesn't make us money and it's not important, so we don't really care. Which, I guess it's a moment of the mask slipping off.
Furthermore, George W. Bush sent advisors and aid to Uganda to fight the LRA and Joseph Kony before the publication of the Kony 2012 video. So Russell's assertion that the US government has not and will not do anything is simply untrue.
Yeah, the US has a military presence in Uganda, Mali, Niger, and other countries in the region. So it's not like they are completely absent from the regional conflicts there.
Russell then goes back into evangelizing, claiming that young people have dedicated their time and, more importantly, their money to seeing change in Uganda. Then there's this weird montage of happy white people and black people hugging each other sent to Mumford & Sons music. The Invisible Children charity then returned to DC and met with politicians and apparently, quote, Democrats and Republicans agreed Kony had to be stopped, end quote.
Bipartisanship. We love to see it.
Okay, but how? How is Kony going to be stopped? I think we can all agree that people who abuse children must be stopped, definitely. But do you think if we just say, please, they're going to go away? What does Russell propose doing here? According to the video, Invisible Children's activism convinced Barack Obama to send a small contingent of advisors to Central Africa to search for Kony and stop the LRA. Again, George W. Bush had already tried this. According to the video, Joseph Kony learns of the United States plan to catch him and changes tactics. Rats. Looks like Kony doesn't want to surrender to the ICC. That wily Kony, always one step ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, and I would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for Jason Russell and you damn meddling kids.
Now we get to that part in the video. Cue photographs of Adolf Hitler and death camp victims. Russell says to these, quote, it's hard to look back on some parts of human history because when we heard about injustice, we cared, but we didn't know what to do, end quote. What does that even mean? That's just a bunch of word salad accompanied by a photograph of Adolf Hitler to evoke some urgent emotion.
Look, if you go on the website and you buy their bracelets and their posters and whatever else, you could have stopped the Holocaust. That's literally what it is. In 1937, if you went down to your local library and went on the mainframe computer, you would have, stopped the Holocaust by buying a couple of posters.
It's just insulting. And also, the Soviets knew what you do. You crush the Nazis.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, his example of the Nazis is really weird because the equivalent of that would be to send the Red Army into Uganda to basically crush the LRA.
The film then directs viewers to, quote, make Kony famous, a household name, end quote. To draw on the analogy they literally just made, Adolf Hitler was very famous, some might even say a household name, and he systematically murdered 11 million people. Invisible Children plans to target cultural figures like celebrities and policymakers to keep Joseph Kony in the public consciousness. The film then implies viewers should engage in culture jamming without using those specific words. Our $10 and up Patreon subscribers will already know this from our bonus episode on the Max Headroom signal hijacking. Culture jamming basically means guerrilla artwork and playing on images which people already have some familiarity with. Banksy's art is a relatively well-known example of such tactics. Then, inevitably, comes the sales pitch. You should buy the action kit, which includes 2 bracelets, some posters, and some stickers, so that you can decorate your own town with Joseph Kony's face. April 20th, 2012 is meant to be the Cover the Night campaign. Viewers should plaster cities with Joseph Kony posters.
Yeah, the grift here shows itself, because of course, Russell doesn't care enough about taking down Kony to supply people with free content. No, the hook here is paying for shoddily printed posters and dumb jewelry so he could virtue signal some particularly asinine, obscure cause.
The film then ends with this quasi-people power message, reminding viewers that the power shouldn't be in the hands of a few people with money, but with the masses. This is a strong message, and even one with which I agree, but the filmmakers just tried to sell you bracelets and posters. Thus, I think this is perhaps more nefarious than we might initially realize, as it appropriates the language of socialism to sell activism as a product, thus defanging the terms. Again, it's word salad set to emotionally provocative imagery.
Yeah, I mean, if Russell was really serious about this message, he'd donate all his money to Chairman Bob Avakian and ensure that the US has the Communist Party CPUSA wins the elections.
We're going to get more into the Kony 2012 video later and how charity or goodwill sometimes smokescreens for neocolonialism, but for now let's just focus on the immediate aftermath of the video. The video went viral, surprising even its creators. If you were on social media in March of 2012, at least in the United States, you remember the Joseph Kony video, or the chatter about it. It had over 100 million views in 6 days. The video did get celebrity attention, including mentions by Oprah Winfrey, Justin Bieber, Bill Gates, Nicki Minaj, Kim Kardashian, Pete Wentz, and Rihanna.
Yeah, I mean, the video got attention from pretty much everyone on Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book. Because celebrities...
Oh, God. The Obama campaign was happy to point out to the public that the White House had authorized sending advisors and money to Uganda to search for Joseph Kony in 2011. 2012 was an election year, and as we all know, Obama won re-election, though probably not because of Joseph Kony.
Okay, now I'm imagining hear me out, this is an idea, okay? We need to pitch this to a production company and get a budget going. Imagine a comedy movie, right? Like a very Weekend at Bernie style swap, where because everyone popularizes the hashtag Kony 2012, it creates a mishap and confuses people, and the American population votes Joseph Kony for US president while arresting Barack Obama as a leader of the LRA.
That sounds like the racist conservative dream scenario.
It would be hilarious because I think in theory you could write in whoever you want for president. So because everyone sees the hashtag Kony 2012, you just write Joseph Kony in for president.
Remember when Harambe the gorilla got like 10,000 votes in the 2016 election?
Oh yeah, man, that like massive respect to that.
Here are people blaming Jill Stein when we could be blaming Harambe.
Yeah.
Then, the video's creator and narrator, Jason Russell, lost it. On the morning of March 15th, 2012, 10 days after the release of the Kony 2012 video, he stripped down naked and ran around sunny San Diego. According to TMZ, he was, quote-unquote, making sexual gestures. Though these claims were later disputed, and apparently, he was just shouting deranged things and running around in the nude. The police took Russell to a psychiatric hospital, where he recovered from what his family said was a breakdown due to extreme stress, exhaustion, and dehydration. It sounds like he did have some sort of mental breakdown, and I don't want to make fun of him for that, or suggest that he shouldn't have received help.
Yeah, I mean, I also wish he got the help he needs, but I will still make fun of him because that shit's hilarious.
We should point out, too, if Jason Russell had been a Black or Indigenous person undergoing psychiatric stress and the police responded, I think it's unlikely he would have been taken to a hospital rather than jail. In fact, it's very possible he could have been hurt or even killed. I'm glad he was helped, and I think this demonstrates that it is possible to handle things like mental breakdowns without lethal force or prison. After Russell's meltdown, Invisible Children and the Kony 2012 video lost some credibility. As a result of this, and probably due to people's short attention span, the Cover the Night campaign was severely underattended. It wasn't long before Kony 2012 basically became a meme. The video only held the most liked spot for 18 days before it was overtaken by LMFAO's Party Rock Anthem, which had previously held the honor, and then by the next viral video, Psy's Gangnam Style.
As the saying goes, one day you're the cock of the walk, the next day you're a feather duster, so there's that.
I love that Korea swooped in to save the day.
Yeah.
There's a giant gold monument to Gangnam Style downtown, by the way.
Seriously?
I've seen it, yeah.
I find that hilarious because Gangnam Style was supposed to be a subtle critique of Gangnam, which is like the gentrified district in Seoul. So a gold statue is really missing the point of Psy's song.
Yeah, I have a whole Adorno-laden opinion on Gangnam Style as a piece of art. So as you probably already know, Joseph Kony has not been found and tried by any government or international criminal court. He may be dead, but his death hasn't been reported. It's also possible that he's hiding somewhere with a small number of LRA followers, though probably not in Uganda, as we'll later discuss. Kony 2012 has faced an onslaught of criticism since its release. Several scholars on African politics have claimed that the video lacks context. For instance, Professor Alex Duvall of Tufts University writes, quote, "The apologists for invisible children call the film raising awareness. I call it peddling dangerous and patronizing falsehoods," end quote. So let's try our best to dive into the real story, the Joseph Kony beyond that viral video. To do that, we have to do something invisible children neglected. We have to look at the history of Uganda and East Central African conflicts. Our story takes us back years before the sovereign state of Uganda existed. In the 1890s, the British sailed up the Nile and proclaimed the colony of Uganda, named after the ethnic group, the Baganda. The Baganda are an ethnic group which the British favored in their colonial administration, thus weaponizing ethnic differences in their divide and conquer strategy. This was a common governing tactic used by colonial authorities.
The Tutsis in Rwanda were propped up, and then that created all sorts of problems. And then the Hausa in Nigeria, same thing.
Meanwhile, in Uganda, the Acholi, a different ethnic group, thus occupied a different stratum of society under British rule. Though the Acholis made up large parts of the military and police, Acholi areas of northern Uganda were generally less developed than the Baganda areas of the south. To quote Ugandan academic Mahmoud Mamdani, quote, "Ethnicity was never just about identity. Its two contradictory moments involve both social control and social emancipation. This is why it makes sense neither to just embrace ethnicity uncritically, nor simply to reject it one-sidedly. Everywhere, the local apparatus of the colonial state was organized either ethnically or on a religious basis." End quote. The same can be said about Joseph Kony's Lord's Resistance Army, or LRA. Though one of the group's tenets is Acholi nationalism, as Joseph Kony himself is Acholi, the group's ideas and actions are beyond an ethnic dispute. Still, we want to avoid pathologizing Joseph Kony as merely a madman whose actions are disconnected from the last century of Ugandan politics. Though he may be strange, violent, and perhaps even arguably evil, he didn't arise out of thin air.
Yeah, I mean, you have to keep in mind also that the LRA are an evangelical Christian militant group, which is a result itself of, centuries of missionary work by evangelical preachers via colonialism. I mean, in fact, even today, you have large evangelical churches from the US pumping millions of dollars into proselytizing in Africa and Latin America and expanding their branches there. So while Kony himself is also an Acholi nationalist, there is definitely a strong element of Christian evangelism and Christian theocracy in the LRA.
Oh, definitely. In 1962, Uganda gained independence from Britain, but problems endemic to colonialism remained. When you sow divisions between people, those of different languages, religions, or ethnic groups, men and women, rich and poor, urban and rural, what have you, it's not reasonable to suddenly expect everyone to work together to run a country, especially when the proper infrastructure isn't in place. Uganda transitioned to a shaky republic, but people have disagreed about how powerful the country's federal government should be versus granting more power to regional groups. Uganda underwent several military coups and seizures of power in the 1960s and 70s. Most infamously, Idi Amin came to power through a military coup in 1971 and ruled until 1979. He's known as the Butcher of Uganda due to his extreme repression and mass killings. Throughout these rotating dictatorships, northern Uganda and the Acholi people in particular have been subject to violence, though they're not the only group who has faced attacks. During the Ugandan Bush War of 1981 to 1986, Yoweri Museveni and his National Resistance Army, or NRA, overthrew a short-lived government led by General Tito Okello, an Acholi Ugandan. Despite Okello's promises to improve respect for human rights and democratize the country, his government did carry out a brutal counterinsurgency against the NRA, which ultimately did not quell the opposition. The NRA committed atrocities in northern Uganda, like mass looting of livestock, rape, burning of homes, and murder, which some argue amounts to genocide. They forced people from their homes and even shot people from helicopters. This pillaging was called Operation Simsim. Still, Museveni is president of Uganda today, 34 years later, and generally praised by the West as a politically liberalizing figure. It's worth noting here that Museveni is a loyal servant to the International Monetary Fund and World Bank and institutes their recommended reforms like structural adjustment programs in Uganda.
Yeah, here's a joke for you. What's the difference between a government and a regime?
What?
Governments follow IMF recommendations, regimes don't.
Meanwhile, vulnerable groups like LGBT people are severely oppressed in Uganda. In the past few weeks, several people have been killed by police in protests against the government following the arrest of a presidential opposition candidate and reggae musician, Bobi Wine. Wine was accused of violating coronavirus restrictions at his rallies, but some believe the arrest is a Museveni tactic to quell opposition. Ironically, Wine also has a delightful little bop called Coronavirus, which suggests sanitation and social distancing, and details the illness's symptoms. I swear to God this is a real thing.
Oh man, I should check this out. This sounds like a bop.
It is, and Bobi Wine, he pronounces symptom as symptom, so he's like, "Hi, fever is a symptom," and I'm like, that's just delightful, Bobi Wine. He's out of jail now, but free him.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Museveni strikes me personally as a very Sadat-like figure, to harken back to one of our earliest episodes. He's generally friendly toward the West and accepting of meddling by organizations like the IMF, so they avoid slapping the word dictator on him, despite a past riddled with violence and what appears to be a firm grip on power for over 3 decades. Unsurprisingly, Northern Ugandans formed resistance movements in the 1980s and 90s as they found themselves persecuted by Museveni's army. One of these was the Holy Spirit movement, a civilian resistance movement led by Alice Lekwena, which, for Joseph Kony, served as somewhat of a precursor to the Lord's Resistance Army. You see this frequently in cults or so-called new religious movements. The leader was formerly a member of another cult or drew significant inspiration from one. This seems to be the case for Joseph Kony and the Holy Spirit movement. The LRA's exact ideology seems unclear. While the Lord's Resistance Army has been regarded as a Christian militia that claims to want to rule Uganda by the 10 Commandments, a detail Invisible Children conveniently forgot to mention in their video, it also sometimes espouses Acholi nationalism. More importantly, however, the LRA represents armed resistance to Museveni's government.
Yeah, the Kony 2012 mania also served as a boon to the Museveni government because it allowed them to request funds and international aid, ostensibly to capture Kony, but that money and support can then be used to flush private pockets while also crushing local dissent.
Definitely, and as we'll go on to see, most people don't think Joseph Kony is even in Uganda.
Yeah, or in some cases, like, not even alive, really.
And none of this is to justify Kony's tactics, such as using child soldiers, but to explain that there is a motive behind the LRA other than wreaking chaos on Central Africa. More importantly, it's understandable how Kony and the LRA were able to gain popularity in the late 1980s. People were afraid of attacks by government forces and their supporters, and rebel groups kept them safe. By the mid-1990s, however, people in Uganda were exhausted from the wars, and efforts to forge peace seemed to have finally moved forward. Kony and the LRA lost their purpose as a resistance movement to government violence in northern Uganda, thus becoming unpopular with most Ugandans. Still, Joseph Kony refused to surrender and continued abducting civilians, including children, to serve as infantry for the LRA. The ICC has charged Joseph Kony and other commanders in the LRA with crimes against humanity and war crimes, including murder, rape, sexual slavery, and recruiting child soldiers. Despite significantly declining in Uganda, the LRA survives in small pockets in the northern parts of the country, plus has been active in South Sudan, the DRC, the Central African Republic, and Chad. Joseph Kony is believed to be hiding somewhere in South Sudan. As of November 2020, he has not been apprehended. Several governments in Central Africa have teamed up to track Joseph Kony and put an end to what remains of the LRA and similar rebel groups, but always seems to be one step behind. From what I've read, I'd guess someone tips off Joseph Kony when another raid is about to happen.
Or, and my theory is, look, I don't have any evidence for it, but my theory is Kony's long dead.
It's definitely possible.
Yeah, I mean, I also believe that bin Laden was dead for a long time, but that's a whole other conversation altogether.
So with all of this context in mind, let's review the Kony 2012 video. First, I think Kony has done some sadistic things, particularly to children, and for that, somebody should bring him to justice. We could have another debate about what justice for war crimes looks like, and we've discussed this before on the pod. But for now, let's just leave it at agreeing that Kony should be held responsible for the horrific things he has done. Part of my problem, however, with the Kony 2012 video, and what others have cleverly labeled Slacktivism, is that liking or sharing this video is exceptionally low stakes, as apprehending an African warlord who kidnaps children is rather uncontroversially a laudable goal. Professor Michaela Luttrell Rowland, who specializes in Holocaust and genocide studies, stated that Invisible Children was, quote, irresponsible to prize feel-good, simplistic messages over complex history and to treat consumerist consciousness raising as interchangeable with education, end quote. Remember, Invisible Children also asked viewers to buy an action kit to spread the word about Joseph Kony, but wasn't very clear about how they intended to use those funds. Regardless, it's emotionally manipulative to imply that these funds will directly help the children, when really they're just going to encourage US military intervention in Central Africa.
Hey, I mean, okay, look, this is so dumb because what do they want to do? Like, what is their prescriptive solution? Do they want to invade Uganda? Do they want to send, like, 80,000 Marines to go into northern Uganda to find this guy? Because, like, either you want to do that and then say you want to do that because then we can figure that out, or not, at which point none of this really matters.
They've also organized raids when they think Joseph Kony and an LRA camp are somewhere, which sound to me very similar to the raid which killed Osama bin Laden. Like, you have soldiers going in, looking for him, finding him, but someone keeps tipping Joseph Kony off. So as long as that keeps happening, it doesn't matter how many soldiers you have.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
In the same vein, talking about slacktivism, we are well aware that our podcast is a more passive form of learning about history, politics, imperialism, etc. But we're not pushing it on you as a way to, like, save any kids. If you support our Patreon, we genuinely appreciate that very much. Still, you are under no illusions about where that money goes. It goes to equipment, hosting fees, reading materials, news subscriptions, my expensive-ass new Wi-Fi.
Yellow cake uranium, AK-47s, you know, all the important stuff.
If someone crafted a similar video or petition trying to get Henry Kissinger or Benjamin Netanyahu sent to The Hague to stand trial for their war crimes, I don't think it would have nearly the same success. Joseph Kony, especially as he's portrayed in Kony 2012, is a universal bad guy. It's a very safe video to share and then pat yourself on the back. You're not risking backlash or alienation from friends and family if you suggest that Joseph Kony should be apprehended. I think there is merit to spreading awareness, as Invisible Children claim they wanted to do, but only when such awareness politicizes us by forcing us to question the world and our values. Almost every person watching that video was probably totally unaware of who Joseph Kony is, but considered themselves firmly in the anti-child soldier camp. In other words, it introduced us to a very unsavory character, but it didn't ask us to interrogate our core beliefs.
It actually reminds me of various campaigns to raise awareness about cancer, in the sense that, like, you're never going to meet someone who's, like, pro-cancer. No one's going to go, like, yeah, you know, cancer is misunderstood, it's very complicated, you know, there's nuance with cancer. The same thing with this. It's like, this guy's, like, you know, a warlord who does, like, war crimes and, like, child soldiers and all that stuff. So it's not like criticizing Kony or raising awareness by talking about his war crimes is controversial in any way, shape, or form. Like you said, if this Jason Russell guy made a similar video about Henry Kissinger, I guarantee you he wouldn't have received anywhere near the same exposure.
Yeah, I also understand raising awareness about how to check yourself for cancer. Like, I should check myself for breast cancer. I know that. But I have heard that from my doctor, like my general physician and my gynecologist. And occasionally I'll see something on like Twitter that says, remember ladies, check for lumps. And I'm like, oh shit, yeah, you're right. That's it. Like, I don't know Susan G. Komen or whoever the fuck, like, their activism has never reached me. Moreover, Invisible Children's goal in publishing Kony 2012 wasn't to apprehend Kony themselves, but to generate awareness so the public would pressure the Obama administration to continue to provide funding and a small number of troops for Kony's capture.
I find it fascinating how these organizations market African or Asian tragedies for money, because surely you'd be better off trying to help, homeless youth in LA or San Francisco, but that wouldn't look nearly as good on a law school application as this sort of weird volunteerism, because this isn't even volunteerism, it's just outright grifting.
For sure. And Mahmoud Mamdani criticized the film for, quote, mobilizing millions to be subverted into yet another weapon in the hands of those who want to further militarize the region, end quote. Goodwill often camouflages imperialism and military intervention. The United States repeatedly refers to its world policing as humanitarian war, and hawks, as well as liberals, eat it up. This isn't to say that military solutions are never necessary. See the USSR defeating the Nazis. Still, we should be extremely skeptical about cause for US military solutions to problems in post-colonial societies. I think we need to problematize why the US military is even brought up to solve problems in Central Africa. Why not directly equip the armies there? What makes you think that Brad from West Point would be better at finding Joseph Kony than someone native to the Central African Republic?
Oh man, I bet Brad from West Point can't even point to Uganda on a map. Also, who died and made the US world police? Because surely it's the responsibility of sovereign countries to, lead their own security as they see fit.
Other scholars and journalists argue that the money Invisible Children raised to spread awareness about Kony or even capture him would be better spent on rehabilitating child soldiers. Again, capturing one person is a myopic solution to a more significant regional problem. Apprehending Kony might bring some justice to his victims, which is a worthwhile endeavor, for sure. But it won't solve the issues in Central Africa brought on by colonialism, economic meddling, and, as Walter Rodney describes, deliberate underdevelopment.
Yeah, I mean, this reminds me of Sankara, when he said something, and I could paraphrase it, where if Western powers really wanted to help, they provide, colonized countries with machines, farm equipment, money, expertise, etc., not the food stuff itself, not millet, rice, and corn. In other words, provide the fishing rods, not the fish, so you can give colonized people a chance to self-sufficiency and not to remain dependent like addicts would be.
This also raises more complicated questions about justice and healing. If Kony is caught or killed, but the children he abused don't receive support, is that justice? I don't think so.
Yeah, and note how Russell doesn't mention anything about a post-Kony project. Surely if he cared about the children that much, he'd vigorously campaign to admit them as refugees if they wanted, or sort of generally campaign for better refugee laws in the US.
Yeah, it's all a grift, like you said. Ugandan NGO director Victor Ochin said that he found the Kony 2012 campaign, quote-unquote, offensive. He said, quote, how do you think Americans would have reacted if people in another country wore Osama bin Laden t-shirts? End quote. Now, honestly, I would think it's hilarious.
Well, that would rule. That would absolutely
pledged to help the United States catch Osama bin Laden, but that's just me. I understand Ochin's point. From a perspective that includes power relations, it's insensitive and patronizing. Many Ugandans also found the film distasteful. From Wikipedia, quote, the screening prompted angry calls to local radio stations by Ugandans, upset that the film was so focused on the filmmakers and Kony while neglecting the conflict's victims, prompting complaints that the film was more about whites than Ugandans, end quote, which seems like a fair enough criticism to me.
Yeah, that's very accurate, to be honest.
Action Aid's director in Uganda, Arthur Larak, said, quote, it doesn't sound like a fair representation of Uganda. We have challenges within the country, but certainly the perception of a country at war is not accurate at all." End quote. And again, all these reactions seem pretty fair to me. Nobody is defending Joseph Kony, but Invisible Children's film misrepresents the problem and prioritizes superficial solutions. I'd also like to point out that there are civil society organizations from around the world. Currently, I'm thinking about Palestinians calling for BDS, calling for their own solutions to problems, versus outsiders like Jason Russell and Invisible Children just making a film. So here's my opinion. Far too many Americans perceive Africa as a place in need of saving, thus justifying so-called humanitarian military intervention and condescending campaigns like the Kony 2012 video. Meanwhile, African scholars, like Rodney and Mamdani for instance, have repeatedly detailed how Western meddling routinely hurts rather than helps Africa. Raising awareness should entail critical conscientization, questioning institutions that abet or justify oppression and our roles in those systems. Ask yourself, how many texts by African authors have I read? How much agitprop, like the Kony 2012 film, have I perhaps absorbed without challenging its motive?
Yeah, like you summed it up perfectly. I don't think there's much I can add to that. I only want to point out that in Toronto, at least, and I don't know if this happens in other cities, but when the weather is really nice, especially in the summer, you have these people who like stand on street corners and like try to hassle you into like signing up to donate for various NGOs and so on. So like Médecins Sans Frontières, so certain like girl rights, one of which is Invisible Children. I think I've run into Invisible Children people once or twice here. So they're still running strong, I guess, and they're still like haggling for donations.
Yeah, they've really, according to their Wikipedia page, scaled back on their activities. But if they're still out there asking for donations to not catch Joseph Kony, like, that says what we need, doesn't it?
Pretty much.
So, a few closing notes. We have some new Patreon subscribers. So welcome Shadi Al-Husari, Captain Pizza, and John Morgan. Welcome to the Foucault Fuck Cult.
Yeah, welcome, guys. You are now in our inner circle.
So they will be hearing some of our bonus content at patreon.com/DosCriminal. And if you are also interested, you can join us and get your own shout out. You can follow us on Instagram at DosCriminalPod and be sure to rate, subscribe, tell your little friends about our podcast. It really does help.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
Spread awareness.
Yeah, Das Criminal 2020.
Thank you guys so much for listening. We really, really appreciate it. You guys tuning in every week.
Yeah, until next time, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.